and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 385, and today's date is June 7th, 2014, and the title of this episode is The Current Economic Collapse News Brief for this Saturday. And before I get started, I just wanted to thank those people who donated to the X22Report.com site. Thank you very much. I do appreciate all donations. I am very grateful. Thank you for donating to the site. Let's get started with the economic collapse news. Now, we understand that a lot of countries, a lot of corporations are now switching over to the yuan and renminbi, and a lot of deals are being made around the world with China and Russia at this time. Now, Christine Lagarde was out there, and she is saying that one day the headquarters for the IMF may shift from Washington to Beijing, because of what is happening with China, with their economy expanding, and with the yuan and renminbi spreading across the world. Christine Lagarde, speaking late today in London, said IMF rules require the main office to be located in the country that is the biggest shareholder, which the U.S. has been since the fund was formed 70 years ago. And you have to remember, there is supposed to be a vote, and the United States in 2010 said that, they will allow the emerging economies to have a larger vote in the IMF, and it was supposed to be brought up in Congress, and they let this slide. It wasn't. They said it will be done later in the year of 2014, and it seems like they're continually stalling. And we can see why they are, because once the emerging economies start to get more and more power, and we see that the growing economy of China and the strength of the yuan and renminbi continually grow across the world, and more countries do bilateral trades and more corporations switch over to their currency, we can see that the IMF might move their headquarters from Washington and move them over to Beijing, and the United States would lose pretty much the voting power here in the IMF. Now, we're seeing more instances of where countries are starting to drop the dollar and move into different currencies. Right now, Gazprom has signed additional agreements for clients to switch from the dollar to euros now, and the renminbi. So 9 of 10 consumers had agreed to switch to these different currencies, and they decided to drop the dollar at this time. Gazprom Neft had signed additional agreements with consumers and a possible switch from dollars to euros for payments under contract. Some contracting parties agreed to switch from dollars to euros and yuans at this time. So now they're balancing both euros and yuan, and we can see when this starts to happen, this is when everyone should start to worry, because we see the IMF, Christine Lagarde, talking about it. We see corporations here in the United States starting to do it. We see countries continually making bilateral agreements with China. There are a lot of clearinghouses being set up in UK, in Kenya. We see New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and many other nations continually making these agreements, and the only nation that's not is the United States. Now, this should worry every single person, because what this means is that since these countries are no longer dealing in the dollar, and we see what's happening in the Middle East with the people rising up and taking control of their country and pushing the private Western central bankers out, this means that these countries and central banks of these countries do not have to hold the U.S. dollar in reserves, since they do not have to pay for goods using the U.S. dollar. And this means that money is going to flood back to the United States. And as we're seeing right now, we are seeing inflation. And every time I go to the market, I see food continually rising. And of course, the manufacturers are trying to shrink the products. They're trying to reel in the costs to make it look like nothing has been going on, but it's getting out of control at this point. We're seeing prices start to really rise, and this is because a lot of these dollars are starting to head back to the United States. It's starting to flood the market, and it's starting to decrease the value of the dollar, and we're seeing this happen more and more. And what this goes on to say, that the so-called Plan B is already partially worked out. The switch of dollar contracts to euros and yuan is agreed on with some of our contract parties. Under consideration is the possibility to switch contracts to rubles. The more economic sanctions it lobs at Russia, Many of the nations are looking at this and they're getting worried about what the United States is doing and how the United States economy is, and more of them are starting to switch into other currencies. Now, we've said this before, we've been following this very closely, slowly, every day, incrementally, and it's continually happening. I think more countries are worried about what's happening here in the United States than the sanctions on Russia or the sanctions on Iran or Syria. They see what is going on. They are losing control in the Middle East. They're losing control in Africa. They're losing control in Ukraine. And many of the nations are saying, oh, something's going on here. Laws are being passed that just don't seem right. They're going after everyone's bank account across the world. They're trying to bring in as much revenue as they possibly can, and something is not going the way the United States and central bankers want it to go, and they are definitely losing control of the entire situation. And this is a scary type of scenario, because when they start to lose control and the plans don't go the way they want, they get desperate, and desperate people do stupid things, and that stupid thing is the event that will blame all of this on another country. Now, we can see the mass shootings are really ramping up right now. If you notice, we're seeing many more mass shootings. They're continually happening one after another, and they're doing this on purpose to try to get these gun bills passed. The more they have, the better chance they have in passing these gun control bills. And of course, they are pushing other bills through. They're trying to get these passed. Of course, I mentioned this before, the Dianne Feinstein snitch bill, where people can tell on other people and they'll be investigated. They can have a court order where they can't purchase weapons, and this is how it all begins. They want people telling on other people. New York City has that law where if you report someone and you think they might have a stolen weapon, you receive $500. It will start an investigation. Doesn't mean that they don't need proof at all. They just have to say, I believe. And this is a very bad thing to start to happen here. And with this new bill coming in, we can see, and everyone's calling it the snitch bill, snitch on your neighbor bill, snitch on your family bill, that this could cause major, major problems, like I've said before. And we're going to see these mass shootings really ramp up, because I think they're in the home stretch right now. I do believe they're going to try to get this gun bill and the UN Arms Treaty passed. They have been pending in the Senate for a very long time, and they really need to bring this home with a major, major mass shooting, and I think that is on the way. It's going to be horrific. They really want to shock America at this point to say, you see, we need to get this passed, and they're laying down the framework by passing all the executive orders with mental illness, with the snitch bill, with everything else, with the reduced magazines. They are really pushing this hard at this point. Now, we can see out in Ukraine, Poroshenko, he is being sworn in at this time. Of course, he had the conversation with Putin that there should be no more bloodshed, and the Lugansk People Republic, they are out there. The leader is saying, listen, if he will take the forces and remove them and look at what we've done here and recognize the region's independence, we will have some type of conversation with Poroshenko, and we can talk about all the issues and move forward with them. And we'll have to see what Poroshenko does, because what I'm seeing right now is there is some type of military outfit out there blowing up buildings, blowing up fuel stations, blowing up pretty much everything. It looks like the anti-terrorism forces have been intensified. Nothing looks like they're being brought back, but he's been sworn in. Let's see where this goes. We'll see what happens. And from everything that I see, and we have to remember, NATO is in Ukraine. We have John Kerry, Biden, his son. They're the CEO of the gas companies. They're going to maintain control. I mean, they're on the board of directors of the gas companies. They're going to maintain control there. We have Ukraine trying to join NATO at this time. The banks are in there saying that you need to take control of the entire country. So we're really going to have to see what Poroshenko pulls out of this and what he actually really does, because actions speak much louder than words. Now, of course, the United States is out there during D-Day, and they were saying that Russia is the problem. They have troops in there. They're the ones who are causing all the problems. And Putin just came out there and said, you know what? You keep saying this. You keep saying there's Russian troops in there. Where is the proof? Show it to us. Show us all the Russian soldiers. Show us what you're talking about. And you have to remember a couple months ago when John Kerry was out there saying they've captured this person, they have communique about Russia. Why didn't they ever show it? And this is what he's saying. He went on to say that the entire world remembers the U.S. Secretary of State demonstrating the evidence of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, waving around some test tube with washing powder in the UN Security Council. Eventually, the U.S. troops invaded Iraq. Saddam Hussein was hanged, and later it turned out there had never been any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. You know, it's one thing to say that you have evidence, and it's another to show it that you actually do. And he's absolutely right. I noticed these government officials continually talk of all this evidence. They were waving around pictures of people being gassed during the Syria crisis in 2013, but they never gave proof. All they showed was the after effects, but they never showed who actually did it. And later it was proved that it was the rebels who did it. Actually, MIT ran an experiment, and they showed with calculations that the Assad government could have never fired a missile landing in the area that it did. It had to come from the rebels. And of course, the whole story that the United States, England, France, they made up completely fell apart. And here we are today. Now they're doing the same exact thing with the chlorine weapons. They can't figure out how to prove this. They have no evidence because it really didn't happen from the Syria side. It happened from the rebel side, and this is why they're having so many problems. And the only thing they can do is show the horrific pictures of people coughing, people dying, and they're trying to move people with emotion instead of using real hard facts. Now, we understand that Iran, their interim deal runs out July 20th. We're getting very close to that time period. And now the United States and Russia are going into private talks with Iran. And we have to remember there is a document that nobody's allowed to see, that only a certain number of people are allowed to go in. You can't bring a camera phone. You can't go in there, make copies. You can read it. You leave it in a special room. And of course, first Iran is having some talks with United States, secretly, and then they're having talks with Russia afterwards secretly. And this must be something about the banking system, having the central bankers trying to get into their banks, trying to maintain control, and to sell their natural resources using the U.S. dollar. And I don't believe that this is going to go through. I don't believe that by this July 20th date that anything will actually happen, and they're trying to maneuver different ways of doing this, and this whole nuclear talk is a complete illusion to cover up the real issue and what they really want. And we cannot forget about Syria and what is happening there. And you have to remember, the Turkish government right now has cut the flow of fresh water from the Euphrates River into Syria. Now we're seeing people are having a very rough time. Water has stopped, and the reservoirs are drying up. People are going to have a tough time surviving. The United States is going to step in and say, look what's happening there in Syria. We have to send in humanitarian aid. We should allow troops to go in there, maybe UN troops or NATO troops to help out. They are trying everything they possibly can to get into Syria because they understand this is the end game. There is nothing left for them. The rebels are losing. They will not stop with trying to get into it, and they've been setting up every single thing to do some type of huge invasion into Syria. I mean, just look at the facts. It's just undeniable at this time. We have advanced sophisticated weapons coming into Jordan, anti-aircraft, anti-tank weapons. They're training thousands upon thousands of paid mercenaries in bases in Jordan. The government already admitted, yes, we are giving more aid to them. They have already removed the government officials within the United States. They replaced them with the paid mercenary as the liaisons to the new government, or they are going to be the new government. They have already set up some scenario that Assad is still using chemical weapons and they're not allowing the arrest of the chemical weapons out of the country. We can see right now that they're trying to have private talks with Russia to convince them not to help out Syria if the United States decides to invade. This is what's going on at this time. And the reason all of this is happening is because they realize they need to get into Syria, remove Assad, and put their natural resources on the US dollar, and then eventually get into Iran, because this will prop it up for a little while longer. And if they go into Syria and Russia comes in, it looks like the United States caused the whole thing, and they don't want it to look like the United States has caused World War III. And this is what they've been setting up at this time. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.